And the evidence is pretty clear on this, and it's emerging rather rapidly. But my friend Joan Bennett at Rutgers University is doing fascinating work with fruit flies because of her own awakening, having a building that she owned down in New Orleans that got flooded during Hurricane Katrina. And she's a mycotoxin expert. She walked into the building with a respirator on and got very sick. And she realized the only thing that was making it through the respirator was the musty smell. So she came back to the lab and began testing fruit flies with the musty smell, with one component of the musty smell. And she found that they stopped flying to the light. They instead flew down. They stopped producing dopamine. There were special fruit flies. They fluoresce when they produce dopamine. So pretty cool what you can order online these days. and then they also began stopped reproducing. And then they also developed what she called Parkinsonian-like symptoms, and then left on. Her subsequent studies showed that it causes mitochondrial damage and locomotor dysfunction. This is just one component within the musty smell, and so the evidence is compounding. Brown University did a study in 2008 and concluded that there was a direct correlation between mold and dampness indoors and depression. And so that's why I brought up my mother's early demise, is because she was also an alcoholic. But the question is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? If you're depressed and you're living in a damp building, and then you're more depressed and you're doing more to self-medicate, and then you're spending more time in the building, which is very common. Anyone who's listening to this, a mold sufferer who's in a moldy building, probably spending a lot of time on Facebook, sitting in the middle of the thing that's making them sick, because they're sick. So they're staying where they are because they're sick, and they're getting sicker because they're staying where they are. Right. And so this is a negative cycle. It's a vicious circle. And so the musty smell is, in fact, according to the emerging medical research, first of all, all molds produce it. So when they're growing, so you don't have to find a toxigenic species in your house. It doesn't matter. If mold's growing in your house, it's producing these gases. And if it's producing these gases in very tight structures that we currently live in, you're breathing them. And by the way, I might remind everyone who's here, you breathe 13 to 15 times a minute. And if you do the math on that, 20,000 times a day. So look at every breath as a dose. Imagine taking 20,000 doses, even small doses of a toxic chemical. And that can't end well, right? And so this whole thing about mycotoxins and even dust, quite frankly, needs to be separated out. The main thing here is dampness in buildings is the enemy. The problem is not mold. The problem is dampness. Mold is a symptom. And actually, you could argue that mold is actually telling you something's wrong with the building. You could actually argue there's a benevolence to it because it releases the smell. If it really wanted to hurt you, it would do it silently. Yeah. It would do it without any indication whatsoever. Instead, it tells you there's a musty smell. Okay, there's a moisture problem here. Now fix this. Now, if you don't answer that, the same way if you don't answer inflammation in your body, it becomes chronic inflammation. That's its own disease. Same thing goes with the building. If you leave that by itself, it will continue to compound and ultimately it becomes cancer in the building. And so this is I look at the building and the body as very, there's a metaphor here. There's a symbiosis, if you will. So anyway, the mycotoxins, this is a major issue because it's got most of the medical community completely blinded.
Yeah, it's a real wild way to look at it, that your home is the living organism, or the organism, you could say, and the living organism within it is the symptom. So that if you have the mold, that's not, it's ringing the bell as to something else is the true problem to it, which kind of shifts your whole perspective on mold problems. Remediation of just going after mold does not work. Dampness is really what you have to go after.